also got a little fan thing I can show you later. Joey! One job.
Don't like hurt each other.
You're fine, Mom. I'll tell you if you're not. Yeah, no, you're fine.
Replays are so gross though.
And when I find something out about a house, I kind of add it in. So if you went last year, some of the houses will be different this year. And so we can't feature every house, but we try to, kind of hit the ones that we can. And first, I'm just going to talk about where the bank is. And formerly, it was like a business. It was like a mercantile, and possibly owned by Theo Kershillis's, who we're going to talk about later. But to the north of it, over a little bit, was the Call Opry, and it was built by the Calls in 1892, and it had many uses. I mean, they used it for plays, but they also used it for political events, school productions, and more. And then in 1916, it was converted to movies, And then in I don't even know if those would be talking in 1916, but maybe they talked. And in 1929, a state-of-the-art sound system was installed. The building burned in 1937, and the Iowa Theater was just a couple doors down to the north. So they had the Opry, and then they also had another theater. So theaters must have been very popular at the time. While it was smaller, it was used until 1950 when it also burned down. And in 1954, the Algona Theater was built and is used today as the Axe House. So that's a little system.
Oh.
You know, so yeah, so it's down there on the street. Yeah, nothing even close. I think it was a 5 and dime. That's where the theater, the theater we use now.
Yeah, it was Baumgars.
Yeah.
Was it
Yeah,
Baumgars.
wasn't Ben Franklin way back?
Ben Franklin Baumgars.
Ben Franklin Baumgars?
Yeah.
Was it called Baumgars back then?
Yep.
So we're
Because
gonna,
that's who run it. The Baumgars family run it.
all right, we're gonna walk down to the park.
Where's
Maybe-
Harley? Does he dump on
Oh,
you?
he's got a, well, you guys probably never, but I got a telemarketer for insurance. And I told her I didn't really need her insurance. And then she said, my last name is your street name. And I said, what? And she goes, my name is Maxine Thorington. And she goes, there's not very many Thoringtons out there. So was the street named after somebody? And so, of course, that caused me to have to call around and research. And I just thought maybe they liked the sound of the name. I just didn't know why they picked it. But guess what? There was this Thorington. And it was James Thorington. He was a lawyer and a congressman and a diplomat. And he studied law at the University of Alabama in 1835. Then he moved to St. Louis. He spent 2 years traveling the frontier, trapping and trading and working on the rivers, and was 6 months in the company of legendary Kit Carson. In 1839, Thorington moved to Davenport, Iowa, and opened a law practice. He served as a mayor, and then in 1854, which is about the time that Algona was founded, Thorington made a successful run for Congress as an anti-slavery Whig. The following year, the new legislature, along with other prominent Whigs, joined the like-minded anti-slavery Republican Party. This made Thorington the first Republican congressman from Iowa. Thorington's greatest achievement in the House of Representatives was the passage of the Iowa Land Grant Bill, and 4 million acres of federal land be given to the state as an incentive for railroad development. This helped Iowa develop east-west trunk lines. Yet this was his biggest accomplishment. It was also caused Thorington's downfall. Many resented these grants, especially persons in towns that were not beneficiaries of the new lines. So he was just a one-term senator, and then from his Republicanism, President Grant appointed him to the Columbian consul, and Thorington and his wife Mary had 7 children, and he's buried in Davenport, Iowa. And there's a whole lot of other things he did as an ambassador to Columbia, but I'll keep it at that. All right, and we're gonna walk over, or before we walk over, let me jump ahead here. This house on the corner was built by Judge Call's son, Asa Frank Call. So Asa Call that founded Algona is his son, Asa Frank Call, in 1884 for $5,000. This was the same year that his father completed his house across the street to the east, and there's a stone there marking it. Actually, it was on the east side of that stone that the house actually sat. These were probably the first grand homes because they were wooden. Before that, they're all cabins and tents and lean-tos or whatever, but these were the first grand homes in Algona. The house originally had a large porch on the front of it, so I think where you're facing is the front, and featured 5 bedrooms and a beautiful mahogany stairs. Mr. F.E. Smith owned it from 1889 until 1893, and then Theo Priscillus purchased it for his son Julius, who moved back from Minneapolis to take over and manage the family store. Theo's grandson, Theodore Chrysillus, added a small addition to the west to give home to a faithful cleaning lady. The house was sold in 1945 and made into apartments, and it's still apartments today. And the mahogany staircase is still there. That's the only thing I can tell you about
You still
that.
have that gray house then?
What's that?
You still own that gray house?
The great, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we just purchased that.
There's somebody that's out there waving down there in black.
Oh, all right.
I should have meant to be more specific, right? I was thinking, I was like, oh, she hasn't even mentioned it. I thought, oh, maybe she No, I see
We also owned a large section. It was more a farm than it was. I mean, you know, back then there were not very many houses, so it's more like a farmstead. In November, he brought his wife Sarah Heckert Paul, and she named the town. As Algona grew, so did their family, with 7 children in all. They built a wooden 2-story house on this plot, and it said to the east of their cabin. So I think the cabin was probably still standing as they were building wooden houses, which that was kind of the, you know, those were the grand houses on this plot, and we placed the cabin. Goodness, how many trucks drive the street? In 1884, they built a grand house on this location further east. It cost $8,000, and then those days that was a pretty good sum of money. And sorry, I'm getting rained on here. So. All right, we're gonna walk down to that sandstone. Postal workers from the Milwaukee line would walk up the hill to stay here. So where the railroad's down there, we walk up all this way to stay here. And currently no one lives there, and it has a parlor, a front formal parlor with a fireplace. It has maid quarters. It has a separate staircase to the kitchen, and it has kind of a grand stairway up to the bedroom. So obviously Richard Palmer was doing pretty good in 1900. But then the Depression came, and a lot of these beautiful houses, when the Depression came, what actually saved them is they were turned into boarding houses. But a lot of people lost their homes, you know, around that time. So a lot of the grand homes are, you know, were lost to the Depression, but people were creative, and some of them did boarding houses and stuff and saved their house. So that's kind of something about built their house. People got married outdoors in West Bend. I'm sorry, West Bend got wet. West Bend at Valley's parents. Their wedding night at the State Street Hotel was interrupted when Dr. Frank had a delivery. He had delivered his sister's baby, and Valley spent the night alone. The couple must have got together because they had 5 children, including a set of twins. In 1917 and 18, the Spanish flu epidemic had the doctor working night and day. Their daughter, Ruth, was married in the house filled with yellow chrysanthemums and ferns. 2 days before the 50th anniversary, the doctor died at age 84, and Valley kept the house until she passed in 1955. And that house is gone, but that's a lot of people recognize the name of the doctor that built a house there. Style House is a Greek Revival Federal style house. It's got a more simple design, and the boxiness is in response to the Victorian era houses that, you know, had all the trim and, you know, all that to it. The columns at the front of the house are Greek Revival. The federal influence is in the curved pediment over the front door. The house has beautiful built-in woodwork inside, and is very nice sun porch on the south. Oh, do I have to? Yeah, this is 402. Yes. Okay. And this was in 1920. It was Tim Harrington's house. And he married Mae Johnson, and Mae Johnson grew up across the street in this Sweeting house. And so she lived right across from Mom and Dad. I thought I'd just point that out. And then 408 is where my son lives.
I found out what type of Foursquare.
A really
look at 'em,
popular local
they're very
photographer at the turn of the century. And this house was built in 1888. And Joe quickly built a photography business. He had a camera that would produce 18 by 22 inches life-size photos. I don't know if any of you have seen those. I actually saw that at a house I was cleaning one time down in St. Joe. And I was like, this is really cool. And who knows, that was his. And he had studied the art of retouching, and this made his business wildly popular for wedding parties, infants, and families. If you have a photo from that era, look at the Nickelin logo. Joe was quite handsome and married the beautiful Isabella. She had long, dark, curly hair that went down her back. And this is taken from a newspaper clipping. They were wonderful dancers and would go to Irvington by horse and carriage at 3 in the afternoon to dance and eat supper. And then the dance would last all night. And then they would come back in the early hours back to Algona. And that's got to be kind of quite a trip by horse and buggy, I would think. So,
Oh, man.
yeah, we're lazy. We'll sit in the house and go, should we go to the movies? Oh, I don't know. But they were committed. They moved out to California in 1920, and the house was first rented and then purchased by the McEnroes and Patricia. Lots of people remember her playing and teaching lessons on her baby grand piano. It sat in that bay window, and so people could see her playing in there. And then I'm going to detour you just a little bit. They have a carriage house, and so I thought I'd point that out. That this is a reproduction because the carriage house actually burned down, but it was built back to the specs. So, to give you an idea, 1888, they were not even about the house. They took off for the weekend, so I could just wander the corner. Actually, they had to buy a special door for their garage because, of course, it's not sized exactly for cars. But it had a hay mound. It had a hay mound door, and they put the hay up in there and then drop it down for the horse. So, but just imagine almost every house of that era had a carriage house somewhere, and especially on Thorington. Thorington Street was the main street of Algona for a while, and doctors, lawyers, bankers, business owners later preferred it as a convenient walk to their downtown offices. It was nicknamed the Silk Stocking Street or the richest street in town. Boy, I hope that's true. Through the years, many of the stately homes have been destroyed by fire, and then the depression hitting hard after World War II. So that's kind of what happened to some of them. That was built in 1920. So you can kind of see the one back there, the blue one, there's some similarities in the architecture. The columns reflect the Greek revival. The house still has the original woodwork and hard floors. The two-car garage was added in 1980. Milzar and Bessie Haggart were the original owners of this house and lived there until 1965. Their daughter Barbara lived there until 1978. And actually last night in the cemetery walk, they talked about Barbara and her sister. Denny and Mary Waller lived here while he was the editor of the Upper Des Moines newspaper. So, just a little bit about this house. And Will Haggard had his English Tudor-style house built in 1937. This had to have been quite a showy house in 1937. The house was featured in an architecture magazine and book. Attention was called to 1.5-story living room projecting at a 45-degree angle. The roof of this section of the house is carried so low that the windows are treated as like wall dormers. So very different style. Haggard was the publisher of the Algona Republican newspaper, a bachelor most of his life. He married his housekeeper, Sigrid, very late in life, and they were buried together at Riverview Cemetery. Bonnie Becker lives here now currently, and I've been in the house, and it still has a lot of the original features to it. And she tried to save a lot of them in the kitchen, which isn't always so easy to do nowadays, but she has a lot of the features of the original kitchen there. And actually all throughout the house, I'm like amazed how she's, you know, in remodeling, people haven't like taken out a lot of it. So, 1946, returning from the war, Bob helped his dad build this house for their family. I asked him, you know, because it's a 2-car garage, I said, did somebody add that on, or was it just a single? And he said, no, his dad loved cars and tractors and anything that had a motor. And so very intentionally they built a pretty large garage on for the time. So a little more modern house. They said that in the back, and you know, lot sizes change or whatever, there was a partial foundation, and it belonged to a small house that a gentleman that took care of the gardens on the street. So he would go around and do the gardening for people. So it is kind of interesting how things shift and move, and you know, over the years. So I thought that was something that was kind of interesting there. This house, the porch area was an open porch, and it was built in 1900. And I promise one of these years I'll research more on it, but it is a turn of the century. It's had a lot of work on it. If you ever go inside the house, the rooms are kind of, you know, they were small back then because they couldn't heat them as well. And so you really see that. And also there's a porch on the other side that also was enclosed. So, but it was a grand house in 1900. This is Bill and Colleen Farnham's home. It was built in 1915. I just want to say, if you see Bill Farnham anywhere, he has missed my tour 3 years in a row. And so just you might want to point that out to him, that I am counting. So it was built in 1915 for Ed and Marie Murtaugh. And the house had a ballroom on the 3rd floor. Now, I've seen the ballroom. It's not huge, what you think of, you know, grand. But yeah, when they would get together, you know, in that era, they would have parties and dances up there. Ed Murtaugh was the owner of the County Savings Bank, which was located on State Street. The marble that was used in the house is the same as what he used in the bank. The grounds included a tennis court and extensive gardens to the east that Marie attended. When Ed lost his bank in the Depression and later died in 1936, Marie was able to keep the house until 1945 by taking in boarders. The boarders were usually teachers or young professionals that came to Algona. It's quite a house, and they've done a lovely job of keeping it, you know, so that you enjoy almost like an attic.
Behind this in the back is where the maid quarters is. It's nice. It's very nice. And do they have a separate stairwell to the? Yeah. They have 2 stairs. Yeah. They got secret doors. Not that I know of. That's the ball.
Yeah, I said I don't know.
I don't know.
And it was built in 1893, and I don't have any other information.
I want the rooster. Let's get the rooster. We're putting down the size of
Kind of cool because the two gentlemen, they were built in 1886, and William Ellers built the house over here, and then Otto, I gotta see it, Falkenhainer, Hainer, okay, Falkenhainer, built his house here, and they are actually built closer together than what you should build houses, even back then in 1886. But they were such good friends that they would run back and forth. They wanted their houses close so that they could run back and forth between the two houses. And the Eilers were from the New York area and bought the Dingley Pharmacy in partnership with Otto. And let's see, oh, I got ahead of myself. And he was experienced in hardware. I have no idea why that's in there. Falkenhainer worked for Dingley and was liked by everybody. And Algona Upper Des Moines, May 16, 1900, stated the Ellers house is a cottage house after the style of the Theo Priscillas cottage. The house was, so this front, on that front, they kind of stole that from the cottage. And I think a lot of houses were going up, and I do think there was something about that they used an architect, so when we build our house, we're gonna, we're gonna style that kind of after that style. The house is 38 by 46 feet, featuring a very large and handsome porch. Construction cost was $3,000, but in 1908, Eller sold the house to Joe Misbach, proprietor of the Kraft and Misbach clothing store, for $3,650. So it was a bargain price, and he moved the Ellers moved to Milwaukee, and then the Misbach store. It was a clothing store, and there's just so many articles about him in old papers, and probably the one that is the most curious, and I'm going to research more on, is that Mr. Misbach had a pilot's license, and this would have been about 1918, and I was like, they licensed people in 1918? And then later on, both of his sons, Lighton and Lawrence, they both had pilot license, and Lighton went on and he was mayor of Algona for a while, and but anyway, the big story about Misbach is that their plane crashed, and they walked away from the crash, him and his two sons. So it was a big story at the time, because I'm thinking plane crashes usually didn't have anybody walking away. So that was a big story about them. And they have lots of interesting stories, but I'm just going to kind of leave it to that. And so then this one was built the same year. They were just within months of each other. And oh, let me see, I skipped something here. Oh, here it is. So Otto Falkenhainer, was he partnerships with Pharmacists Mutual?
He was in that family. I'm not
He
exactly
was in that
sure.
family,
I'm not
yeah.
exactly
So,
sure.
so him and his wife Anna built this house. The rock wall was built of stones removed from the street. So this stairway here, when it was first constructed, his daughter Helen Falkenhainer Pletz and her husband Frank lived here for many years. At the end of the Depression, the upstairs was converted to an apartment. So they had an apartment with its own utilities, and stairs were moved to the front foyer. Later, the stairs were moved to their original location, and the second set of utilities were also removed. And this was just remodeled, what, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, and they tried to go back to as much the original plan as they could. So, but thank goodness they kind of saved that house. Now I gotta be quiet because this is our refreshment stop. And currently the Ellers house now is owned by Scott and Jody Rapp, and they have your refreshments. This is your intermission. And what was the name?
It was the Heisey House, I believe,
Heisey
because
House.
this is the Heisey Hill.
Are they strong or are they okay?
Right, so
No, they're fine.
anyway, I'll
Okay.
pass it around so you can look at it a little closer.
So that's a postcard from eBay.
He had a very up and down career. Was it great? I read through that whole